The COVID-19 pandemic forced children to bear an enormous burden to protect the vulnerable. And now, years later, we're still grappling with the consequences. But here's where it gets controversial. Was this sacrifice truly necessary, or could more have been done to shield the youngest members of society? Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson recently addressed this very question during an inquiry into the pandemic's impact on children, offering a candid yet defensive perspective on the government's handling of the crisis. Johnson began by reiterating his apologies for the government's missteps, a gesture that, while commendable, does little to erase the challenges faced by children during this period. He expressed pride in the resilience of teachers and schools, who navigated what he described as unbelievably difficult circumstances. But this is the part most people miss. Johnson pushed back against claims that the government was unprepared for school closures in early 2020, insisting that he believed significant thought and care had already been invested in such decisions. However, he also admitted to hoping schools could remain open, labeling their closure a nightmare idea and a personal horror. This sentiment contrasts sharply with the testimony of former Education Secretary Gavin Williamson, who conceded that the government erred in trying to keep schools open in March 2020. Williamson's evidence revealed that a formal plan for closures was only finalized on March 17, 2020, just one day before the announcement. Johnson acknowledged the criticism over this lack of planning, but argued that any changes would have required a deeper understanding of COVID-19, which was still largely unknown at the time. He emphasized the rapid spread of the virus, making it incredibly difficult to implement effective measures. The primary goal, he stated, was to prevent an appalling public health crisis. Here's where opinions start to diverge. While Johnson defended the government's actions, the inquiry also highlighted long-standing disagreements between him and Williamson, particularly over the decision to close schools again in 2021. Williamson's frustration was evident in a profanity-laced message he sent to Johnson in February 2021, expressing his dismay over the backlash received for closing schools just one day after reopening. Johnson also addressed the idea of mass testing in schools as a means to keep them open, but he admitted this was never feasible due to the emergence of the Alpha variant, which accelerated the virus's spread. One of the most contentious issues during the pandemic was the exams fiasco of August 2020, where an algorithm designed to prevent grade inflation instead downgraded 40% of predicted results. The public outcry forced a U-turn, with students ultimately receiving teacher-predicted grades after exams were canceled. During the inquiry, Johnson was confronted with his own leaked messages, in which he criticized the Department for Education (DFE) and even considered firing ministers. He described himself as being in a thoroughly homicidal mood at the time. When asked if the exams debacle was a disaster, Johnson agreed but argued that it must be viewed in the context of a much larger crisis. And this is where it gets even more contentious. Johnson later suggested that lockdown and social distancing measures probably did go too far, and that children could have been exempted. He stressed that in any future pandemic, school closures should be an absolute last resort. As this session of the COVID inquiry concludes, it leaves us with a critical question. Did we strike the right balance between protecting public health and safeguarding the well-being of our children? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's spark a conversation that could shape how we handle future crises.